Hello and welcome to Access Asia. Coming up, outrage as the fate of girls worsens in Afghanistan. The economic situation so dire that some parents claim they are forced to sell their daughters for the rest of their family to survive. Known simply as Albo, he's been a DJ, a working class activist, and now he is Australia's new Prime Minister. We take a look at Anthony Albanese's personal journey. And ask someone in South Korea how old they are, and there are 3 different answers. The new president wants to change this. We'll take a look at how millions of Koreans could soon get younger. Well, since the Taliban returned to power in Afghanistan last year, international aid for the country has dried up. The pandemic and the ongoing food crisis, too, has complicated a dire economic situation. Unicef says as more families are pushed deeper into poverty, they are forced to make desperate choices, such as putting children to work and marrying girls off at a young age.
Isolated in the mountains of northwestern Afghanistan, the residents of this encampment are women and children trying to survive. Their most valuable resource is little girls, and many are for sale. 10-year-old Amina was sold 3 months ago for the equivalent of $2,300.
I sold my daughter because of famine and poverty. I owed a lot of money, more than $2,000.
Do you know when you're leaving, and how do you feel?
I'm leaving soon.
And how do you feel about that? A man 20 years older than Amina is coming to take her as a wife in several weeks. Are you ashamed when you see her crying like that, to have sold her, married her off?
It's because her children are dying of hunger. I have no other choice.
There's no guarantee the husband will wait until the little girl goes through puberty before forcing her into sexual relations. The woman who lives in this tent is one of the poorest of the poor, surviving on less than 50 cents a day. She has 3 children, a 5-month-old baby, a daughter with disabilities, and 5-year-old Sabera, who she sold for $500 to a couple that couldn't have children.
I brought my daughter to the family that bought her. I lied to her and then left discreetly. She spent the night there, and the next morning she cried and she ran away. But the family came back to get her, and she wept and held onto my leg so that they couldn't take her. I had to sell her, even if I know that no one should separate a mother from her child. How could I give away a little girl like her? All of my children were going to die of hunger.
While it's difficult to measure, cases of young girls being sold are believed to have doubled over the past year. The 28-year-old couple that bought Sabera lives in one of the area's nicer houses. The wife doesn't work, and the husband owns a small grocery store.
When she cries, it makes us really sad, and in those moments, we wonder why we did it. But we tell ourselves that if she'd stayed with her mother, she would have ended up in the street. Her mother had to sell her, and we think we can offer her a better future with a good education.
In a few days, they'll go pick up Sabera again, hoping she'll eventually accept her new life.
In Australia's general election, climate change was so critical that the poll was dubbed the climate election. There was a surge in support of candidates wanting urgent action like Greens and Independents. In fact, the primary vote for both major parties fell. But in the end, Anthony Albanese and Labour won, ending 9 years of Conservative rule. We take a closer look at the country's new Prime Minister.
After decades in politics, Anthony Albanese is an old hand at selfies, patting babies' heads, and cuddles with dogs. Widely known as Albo, he often refers, when meeting constituents, to his humble beginnings. Born out of wedlock in 1963, he was raised by a single mother on her handicap pension and her work as a cleaner. And he says his childhood in social housing with government aid helped form his political outlook. After entering politics at Sydney University, Albanese made a name for himself in the Labour Party, as a member of Parliament for more than 2 decades, and as a cabinet minister for Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard. In 2013, he was named Deputy Prime Minister, and then in 2019, he became the head of the opposition.
I'm honoured and very proud to be elected the 21st leader of the Australian Labor Party.
As a candidate for Prime Minister, Albanese promised a slew of measures to help struggling Australians, from financial assistance for childcare and the elderly, to help for first-time homebuyers, to better gender equality. While the economy was the main focus of the campaign, the 59-year-old said his premiership would mark a major foreign policy shift, and an environmental one too, after years of extreme bushfires.
Climate change is here now. Our region is changing now. The jobs and skills and infrastructure that will grow our economy are needed now.
Criticised by Conservatives as being too far to the left and for gaffes on the campaign trail, Albanese shot back, arguing that he's built his career on pragmatism and honesty.
In April, Indonesia banned exports of palm oil in an effort to bring down domestic prices. The move was one of the biggest acts of crop protectionism since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which has contributed to a surge in global prices of the raw ingredient. But the government has done a U-turn after the ban had shocked global markets and angered local farmers. Kamina Dalek and Alison Sargent have more.
Indonesia has reopened the tap to foreign buyers of palm oil. And while Indonesian farmers are set to profit, local distributors like this one are worried they and local consumers will be the ones paying the price.
I hope that as exports are resumed, domestic supplies will still be enough so that prices can be stable or even drop.
Indonesia produces 60% of the world's palm oil. Prices surged when droughts in several countries impacted the supply of other edible oils. The government tried to keep palm oil prices low with measures like price controls and unlocking reserves. But the war in Ukraine only exacerbated the supply crunch, and in April, Jakarta finally turned to an outright export ban. Farmers were hit hard.
During Ramadan, people couldn't afford to buy clothing for their children. With the low price for palm oil, farmers don't even want to harvest it.
The ban failed to force palm oil prices down to the target of about 95 cents per liter. The president ultimately lifted it after 3 weeks, but said producers would still be required to sell a portion of their stock locally at a set price.
Even though exports have been resumed, the government will continue to tightly monitor and to ensure that supplies and prices are in check.
The return to business as usual will be a boost to state coffers. Indonesia's finance minister says the ban would have cost the country over 400 million euros a month.
South Korea's new president, Yoon Suk-yeol, has proposed a range of controversial moves, but one has united most of the population on all sides of the political aisles. Yoon plans to scrap the complex Korean age system. If it moves ahead, this means that Koreans are to become 1 or 2 years younger. To talk about this is Yena Lee. Hello to you, Yena. First question is, what?
Yes. Well, let's start with the easiest, the international standard age. For instance, I was born in July 1991, which means that I am 30 years old until July when I turn 31. Since 1962, this system has been used in South Korea at hospitals and for voting rights and many other official circumstances. However, there's a second legal way of counting age, and this since 2001. Regardless of your birthday, you gain a year every January 1st. This means that I am 31 already using this method, and this second system is used for things like military conscription and juvenile protection laws.
What are the origins of the second system?
Well, the second way of counting, let's call it the modern Korean age system. This basically means that everyone born the same year is the same age. And if I had to really look for reasons why it's convenient and why it's lasted for so long, it's maybe that in Korea the school year starts in March after a long winter holiday. So everyone in a given class is theoretically the same age. And it's also very useful because in Korean culture, we don't address people the same way according to how old we are. A friend is literally someone who's born the same year as you. Anyone who's even just a year older, you would call them an older brother or an older sister. And this second method is actually a spin-off from the traditional counting age method.
All right, so I am your older brother then, that's very clear. Tell us about the third system.
Now, this traditional method is when you're already 1 year old, as soon as you're born, and the next time it's January 1st, you turn 2. So according to this method, I'm 32 already. And it would definitely mean things that become very strange when you're born on December 31st, because on the second day of your time on Earth, you are 2 years old. Now, this third system isn't official. It's not used in official capacity anymore, but it's widely used in everyday life.
What's the backstory to this custom?
Well, there's an urban legend that it takes into account the time a baby spends in the mother's womb, but the more credible theory is that it's based on Chinese traditions where numbers begin at 1. For example, in most of Asia, there's no ground floor, or the buildings start on the first floor.
3 systems, I feel like this is very, very confusing.
Well, it's so confusing. There are even internet calculators on Korean search engines to help people figure out how old they are. For young people, it's very common to ask what year you were born in rather than asking their age. However, more seriously, it can be really problematic when it comes to, say, COVID vaccines. In March, the South Korean government announced that vaccine passes would be mandatory for children aged 12 to 18, but they were referring to Korean age. However, vaccines at the time were only eligible for people 12 and over according to international age. So there are a bunch of 11-year-olds who had not actually had the vaccine but were told to have a vaccine pass. So in the end, the government had to make an exception for those children stuck in limbo.
Presumably, this is why the new South Korean president wants to keep only one system.
Yes, indeed. The freshly elected Conservative is pushing to abolish that 2001 Korean age system from all administrative and official institutions. It's an idea that has broad public support, even though there would be inevitably some teething problems at the start. And to compare with other countries in the region, Japan got rid of their old system and switched to the international counting system in the 50s. China did so during the Cultural Revolution, and even North Korea got rid of it in the 1980s.
All right. I just have to say, age ain't nothing but a number. All right. Thank you very much, Yena Lee, talking us through that. That's it for this edition. Thank you for watching, and please stay tuned to France 24.
They observe. They contact us. They report, film, photograph. They are the voice of the voiceless. Your eyes in the far-flung reaches of the world. The Observers, a network of 5,000 committed citizens working with France 24.
One of our observers in Côte d'Ivoire, Gaspard.
Amateur footage and testimonials checked by our journalists and broadcast weekly. On The Observers, on France 24 and observers.france24.com.